United Nations in here today with languages. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming. So my name is Sarah Schulman. I'm a 6-year PhD student, and I'm a candidate now in education and linguistics, so I work in the College of Education with Marianne. We also work in Spanish and Portuguese. I'm excited because this is actually my 10th year as an educator. I started in 2008, but my colleague Marianne does have me beat. You know, we'll say it's because she's 2 years older than me, but.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm Marianne. I teach Spanish, and right now I teach at the education department. So I've been teaching for a while, and like Sarah, I'm also a PhD candidate for educational linguistics. So thank you for coming.
Yeah. And our hope today is we're going to talk about classroom management, but we're not trying to tell you what to do. The idea is to give you some ideas and things to think about, hopefully to incorporate into your own teaching practices. And we're thinking about a title, and I thought, and it's probably because I grew up on the East Coast, so I'm always thinking about water. Water is very, and you too, just comes to me so naturally. So kind of sounds cliche, but smooth sailing. If you think about a sailboat, the best time to sail is when you're on just super calm, glassy water. But teaching, much like the ocean, can be somewhat unpredictable. So you'll have those days where everything goes perfectly, and then all of a sudden the wind kicks up and you feel like you're going to capsize.
And suddenly a huge wave.
And a huge wave.
Unexpected
huge wave. So our hope here is that these tips will help you kind of navigate those unexpected moments in your classroom, because they happen, and sometimes they happen far more frequently than you would like. So,
and our intention is to have like a collaborative dialogue in which, you know, like we can discuss tips for effective classroom management.
Yeah, absolutely. So contribute, ask questions as we go along.
Okay, so we're gonna start with an icebreaker or grounding activity, and Sarah is gonna pass some note cards, and we would like you to write a question of something that you would like to address during this workshop today, an issue or concern on classroom management.
I think it's a bad question, right? Any question is a good question. So think maybe about your own personal experience as a teacher, something that you've been wondering about. And we'll get back to this activity in a little bit. What we're actually doing, Marianne and I today, are going to be modeling a couple of teaching strategies. Some of them come from ESL. So the intent behind that too is if you see something you like, then by all means try to use it in your own classroom. It doesn't necessarily have to be classroom management, but as we all know, just having those strategies in place is part of managing a classroom. So no rush to write your question. Oh gosh, these are good questions so far. I feel like we might have to do part 1, part 2. Actually, there will be a kind of a part 2. There hasn't been a flyer put out yet, but it'll be Thursday, September 27th at 3:30 p.m. I will be doing and Marianne, if she's free, will hopefully join us too, best practices. And those people who would like to attend, we're going to actually have some people do some demos, like how to use Apple TV in the classroom. I'll be modeling another ESL strategy for you to think about. Anything that you bring and share, it's kind of like a grab and take type of session. So I'll be uploading all of your materials in a site called Padlet, and it's free. I'm going to give you a QR code that you can scan when you come in, and you'll have access to any materials that are shared during that workshop. So be on the lookout for that flyer. So that way, we're always hunting down things we can use with our students. So hopefully this will be beneficial for everybody, regardless of what language you teach. Awesome. Okay. Anyone else? Great.
Go on.
Okay, yeah, no rush. If you think about it later, just add it to us. That's not a problem. Okay. So we're actually going to start with an activity that is ESL, and this is very simple. And I'll model it up here on the board. I'm going to have you actually form probably a couple of groups. You might need a second bag of markers in a sec. But this is called a T-chart. So you start with an overall concept, like for us today, it's going to be classroom management. And typically you're going to draw, it's kind of silly, but a lot of times you'll see people draw like a little eyeball. And then, you know, the ear, my really rough ear. But essentially what I want you to think about is when you walk into a classroom as an observer, what do you see when you walk into a classroom that would you would consider classroom management, what would you hear? So the idea behind this is we throw out these terms like classroom management, critical pedagogy, differentiated instruction, and we don't necessarily take the time to think about what those words really mean. So when you hear someone say, oh, that person does excellent classroom management, what in your mind do you see? What is that person doing that conveys good classroom management, and what does it sound like? So what I'd like you to do, we have a couple of huddle boards here and some markers. You can kind of pair up. So how many people do we have? Okay, maybe do...
Do you mind maybe three of you to be in the same table?
Yeah.
And then like that?
Yeah, nice. We can do 3 groups of 3. Perfect. Yeah. Marianne was quicker with the math than me. It's my forte. Classroom management, yes. Collaborative teaching. Excellent. So everyone can take a huddle board, and you guys can share. So just like that. So what does it look like? You can draw the eyes or whatever. You can write C in here too if you don't want to be artistic. Yeah. C in here. So take about 3 minutes or so.
Abby, you can draw.
Have seen it.
¿Cómo cuentas?
Look like and sound like.
Look like. Podemos ponerlo en la... Sí.
Esa clase
So imagine when you go into a class and you're like, remember when we were with, in our case with Unisites, in your case?
Taking about 2 or 3 minutes to ask a question that we hope to have addressed through this workshop. So there's no such thing as a bad question, right? Any question is a good question. So think maybe about your own personal experience as a teacher, something that you've been wondering about. And we'll get back to this activity in a little bit. What we're actually doing, Marianne and I today, are going to be modeling a couple of teaching strategies. Some of them come from ESL. So the intent behind that too is if you see something you like, then by all means try to use it in your own classroom. It doesn't necessarily have to be classroom management, but as we all know, just having the strategies in place is part of managing a classroom. So no rush to write your question. Oh gosh, these are good questions so far. I feel like we might have to do part 1, part 2. But actually, there will be kind of a part 2. There hasn't been a flyer put out yet, but it'll be Thursday, September 27th at 3:30 p.m. I will be doing and Marianne, if she's free, will hopefully join us too, best practices. And those people who would like to attend, we're going to actually have some people do some demos, like how to use Apple TV in the classroom. I'll be modeling another ESL strategy for you to think about. Anything that you bring and share, it's kind of like a grab and take type of session. So I'll be uploading all of your materials in a site called Padlet, and it's free. I'm going to give you a QR code that you can scan when you come in, and you'll have access to any materials that are shared during that workshop. So be on the lookout for that flyer. So that way, we're always hunting down things we can use with our students. So hopefully this will be beneficial for everybody, regardless of what language you teach. Awesome. Okay. Anyone else? Great. Go on, yeah. No rush. If you think about it later, just add it to us. That's not a problem. Okay. So we're actually going to start with an activity that is ESL. And this is very simple. And I'll model it up here on the board. I'm going to have you actually form probably a couple of groups. You might need a second bag of markers in a sec. But this is called a T-chart. So you start with an overall concept, like for us today, it's going to be classroom management. And typically you're going to draw, it's kind of silly, but a lot of times you'll see people draw like a little eyeball. And then, the ear, like really rough ear. But essentially what I want you to think about is when you walk into a classroom as an observer, what do you see when you walk into a classroom that you would consider classroom management? What would you hear? So the idea behind this is we throw out these terms like classroom management, critical pedagogy, differentiated instruction, and we don't necessarily take the time to think about what those words really mean. So when you hear someone say, oh, that person does excellent classroom management, what in your mind do you see? What is that person doing that conveys good classroom management and what does it sound like. So what I'd like you to do, we have a couple of huddle boards here and some markers. You can kind of pair up. So how many people do we have? Okay, maybe do.
Do you mind maybe three of you to be in the same table?
Yeah.
And then like that.
Yeah, nice. We can do 3 groups of 3. Perfect. Mariana was quicker with the math than me. Sorry for taking this. Classroom management, yes. Collaborative teaching. Excellent. So everyone can take a huddle board, and you guys can share. So just like that. So what does it look like if you draw the eyes or whatever? You can write C in here too if you don't want to be artistic. C in here. So take about 3 minutes or so.
Abby, you can draw.
¿Cómo? What does
Look like and sound like.
Look like. Podemos ponerlo en la.
Parece gracioso.
So imagine when you go into a class and you're like, remember when we were with, in our case with Unisites, in your case, I guess it was Damiano, that you have to record somebody else and go to the class. What kind of things you saw that they were like good class?
Good morning. Groups that with each other, like out of their chairs and interacting.
That to me is the sign of a successful
Awake.
classroom
Like
management.
being ready.
You know, so right, all that
Judgment,
interaction, student interaction.
Yeah, students are like our.
verbal honor, verbal cues that they.
One thing I
Like they're talking,
learned from other
or
kids,
they're all participating.
which I actually I wasn't is also like in target
Participating in the
language.
target language.
Activities are included throughout the day, like it's sort of chronological order as the class progresses.
sound?
And I always thought that was really
Oh, yeah,
good
it's
because it kind of lets students
Speaking in the
know
target.
where the lesson plan is going, but it also helps the teacher remember to know.
So the students actually see that?
Yeah. Yeah, they list like, okay, today we're gonna do this, first like warm up, do this,
Good
then
job.
this, and this, and then, you know, to top off this. Don't forget that you have homework due when, those sort of announcements.
So,
That's
that's,
an
it's different from some, we
abbreviation.
do, like.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's not necessarily listening activities, but it's the list of objectives, so that the students know exactly the direction that they're taking.
Yeah, that works
So we
too,
can
yeah.
put,
That's where.
Yeah. Like,
Change
list of,
every
student
time.
activities.
For me,
I didn't put yours down.
that's
Look
that's gonna be more beneficial.
You change them that fast?
I change activities every like 10-15 minutes.
No,
We
yeah.
often have activities that go
Or like
25, 30.
speakers, teacher talks, students.
Dynamics.
Dynamics.
Well, I guess it depends on how they. But so that the students know exactly what the day is. Like, yeah, kind of like all.
Yeah. Right, right.
Yeah.
The order how you do it,
And then always
let's
start
dip in
having that man quote.
object and objectives, warming up activities, and then at the end, something like, okay, are we understanding some tone of closure? So,
Like some looks that would be really
Yeah.
worth it. I
Yeah.
feel like that was
It's kind of vague. Yeah, that's not.
It's also just a quick check to see they did their reading.
¿Qué más?
The sound.
Oh, relevance.
Okay, 1 more minute?
En esto, se tiene que ver con
Connection.
It was actually.
Ajá.
Minute and a half, so it's okay. Minute and a half
Exactly.
negotiation.
Okay, 1 minute and a half more.
More?
Yeah, because we were like 1 minute and they were like 2, 1.5.
Ah, okay.
They have comfortable they feel.
Sí,
Right. All the information.
So you are, here is in the middle because it's both?
kind of.
For me,
I think
when
it was just,
when I hear the students,
I think our looks and sounds were not as, we didn't separate the sound.
Yeah.
Talking about linguistics, verbal and non-verbal communication.
Maybe even like,
That's your
one thing,
body
like,
language.
Body language.
teacher comes in and just says like, hey, how are you? Sort of starts the conversation in the target
This is
lesson.
the issue in our class.
Or like some sort of greeting,
Like off topic.
small
¿Qué
talk.
más?
Yeah.
Oh, pero no, pero tiene razón.
Um,
Some sort of, ¿cómo se llama eso? Higher,
target language.
Sí.
say some sort of
Something like
understanding what's the dynamics
Yeah.
of the class in terms of
you know,
who has the floor to speak.
Sí.
It sort of get their brains
Porque puede,
thinking in the
hay
target
clases que son hopefully nuts and everyone says whatever they want when
No,
it's
sí,
fine.
tú hablas.
I just like
I don't want to do that.
Ajá.
Or, you know what I mean?
Not
Like,
just,
Right.
right, asking questions.
No.
Turn to
Right.
Or like just grab
Like, put this down. I'll start.
And mostly teachers have
Fighting.
with the students.
So yeah, natural.
Like the teacher,
It's the facilitator.
the teachers and facilitator, the students are the ones who are doing activities. The
Right.
students are the ones engaged, the teacher is facilitating, it's not the one speaking, so to me lecture is.
Okay, so is everybody done?
More or less?
More or less?
Mhm.
Okay, so what we're gonna do now, we're gonna stand up and then we're gonna read somebody else's board. What they wrote,
So you're gonna do
okay?
gallery
So maybe this group can read that board, this group can read that board, and you guys can read this board.
While you're reading, we want you to think about what you all have in common and what some differences might be.
So,
Groups, attention, participation.
Yeah, I used to target.
Yeah, so attention, it's interesting, are they talking about like attention to other classmates or attention to the teacher? I would think classmates. Rituals, yeah, I wonder what that would be, maybe like coming to the
It's like a
classroom
routine.
at the beginning and just starting off, you know,
Mhm.
with the target language, that kind of thing, maybe. Following, listening to instructions, yeah, I mean, that's what I hope there's not too much of, because that's teacher talk. So it would be nice if that was intuitive, and that's a part of the PowerPoint, you know, that's just.
Depends on the type of class.
Okay,
Es que ahorita
do you need one more minute to read? Or are you,
Maybe like
are you done?
they switch.
Then we
Student
switch
becomes
one
a
more
teacher,
time.
the teacher becomes a student.
One more
That's
time.
what I
So
mean.
you're gonna rotate one more time. So we go.
So, we're gonna rotate one more time and listen.
I'm trying to give you a little bit of steps there. Up your step.
Sounds like they all encourage each other actually, and laughing.
Groups is a good one.
Depends what they're laughing at.
Maybe like a routine, like something that they do.
I'm thinking like
Body language.
No, I think it's more like meditation. You know, I actually saw somebody doing some meditation before like the class started.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's funny, you know, sometimes finding is good, like sometimes when you have competitions, they actually do kind of right.
Like they were meditating.
I had one guy knock a girl down, that's not good. I know.
They were after.
All right, so right where you are, we'd like to just kind of bring this together. And what are some of the things that you noticed that were similar on all boards? You can sit down or stay standing, it's up to you. Kind of free forming here. Free flowing, I suppose, would be the better word choice. What did you all have in common? In terms of what it looks like?
Participation.
Participation?
Engagement.
Engagement, good. Anything else that was similar?
Something about having objectives too.
Objectives,
and goals.
okay. Okay.
Speak on a target language.
Oh, for sound, right?
Yeah.
Okay, for sound. What else for sound, besides the target language? What does it sound like? Can a room be noisy and it still be organized?
It should be noisy, there should be chaos, there should be like half of the students speaking at the same time.
So we should, and that's a major difference between us language teachers and say another subject like math, because when an administrator walks in, they should hear the students using the target language. It should be noisy. We have organized chaos, right, in our rooms. We definitely have organized chaos. So we could probably put that down just kind of as a lump sum. Organized chaos. How do we make that happen?
Like in our warm-ups when they have to walk around and
Yeah.
get to know each other, and then they're definitely talking a lot. There's a lot of noise in the room,
A lot
but
of noise.
actually looks good.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Yes, I'll be honest, I had a couple times, because I was situated next to an English room when I was teaching high school, they absolutely hated it when the students got really into something, because the volume went whoop through the roof, and I taught 30 bodies in a small classroom, so it happens. I didn't feel bad about it, other than, the English teacher was testing me, I felt bad, but other than that, the principal was like, keep the good work. So, with that said, we're going to give you some tips. We'll kind of scatter some anecdotes throughout, ask you if you have any questions. Have Marianne start off with just the first tip, which is just be the teacher.
And this may be very obvious because most of you already have experience in the classroom because I see some familiar faces.
Yeah.
But regardless if you have experience or you don't have experience in the classroom, you have to always remember what is your position in the classroom, that you are the teacher. Like I was discussing with Sarah before, like right now I'm teaching a class that is not my area of expertise, and so I'm trying to do the best job that I can to do that class. But one thing, I have to portray myself like I know what I'm doing. I'm organized and I'm here to teach you. And sometimes maybe I don't know the answer, but that's okay. I still need to keep my figure that, I'll get back to you, or maybe, bring it up at discussion, as a debate. But sometimes we forget that we are the teacher, and then we get intimidated by student comments or things like that, right? So it's important to know how to address our students in a way that is distant but not too distant, and close but not too close. And how do we do that, no? Like sometimes something as simple as going and doing like this and being at the same level that your student is makes your student feel more comfortable to ask you a question. Or maybe walking around the class to, as I was doing when you were putting together Sarah was doing when you were putting together your ideas, like, oh, what are you writing, or what you're doing, or making a kind of comment that gives you some closeness,
Yeah.
but at the same time, still you are seen as the teacher.
Yeah.
Also, your tone of voice is very important, not too loud, not too quiet. Everybody needs to hear you, but if your tone of voice is too high, sometimes you can be perceived as you're being mad or angry, or that you're trying to impose something.
Yeah.
So to try to have a good tone of voice. Formal versus informal, the way we dress is also important. We need to be professional. We can dress casually, but to an extent. There are some type of clothes that you wouldn't wear to a classroom, or how you would address some of your students. You cannot address them like they are your friends. In the end, they are your students. So taking that into account. Body language. Sometimes you don't need to say something. You just need to look at your student. Maybe she or him is in the cell phone, and maybe you can do a little joke like, and something as simple doesn't make it awkward, but they know they have to respect the classroom rules,
I go like
or
this
like
for
this
earbuds too.
for
Yeah,
headphones, or just basically giving a smile to say hey, you're doing a good job, or those kind of things help.
Yeah.
And the amount of target language. When I teach Spanish, I try to speak Spanish all the time. Also because it's my first language, so for me it's much easier. But I try to speak with them very slowly, doing all these movements like I'm a clown, But sometimes the students get frustrated and we need to explain something in their own language, and that's okay too. But try to keep, as much as you can, the target language when you are teaching a foreign language.
Yeah.
And then,
Yes, absolutely.
not so much a question, but it's interesting because you do come from ESL, right?
No, I learned as a second language already when I was an adult.
Do you teach ESL?
I do now.
Okay, because you were talking about ESL.
Oh, well, I teach a class in education,
Yeah.
so we touch a
Yeah,
little bit
we,
ESL, but
we do
it's
have
not
is when I did teach ESL, it was very interesting. You have to be in English 100% of the time because my audience had disparate languages. So there was no one language
Yes.
you could go back into. And so I always tell the TAs in FLL the same thing. It's like, you can do this in 100% target language because in ESL you have to, and it absolutely works.
It does.
It does.
And with any age too, because I work with third graders over summer, and most of them came from countries in Africa, and they all spoke different languages. There was a lot of trans-languaging going on, which is really fascinating to see between the kids, because there were some were speaking Swahili and others were speaking Arabic, and there's massive disconnects there with the language. But they make it happen. It's amazing to see. And it's important for us adults to remember that too, that our students as learners of a language are going to have those moments of frustration, so we have to think as educators, what would it feel like to be in their shoes, and just making ourselves more accessible, which is why this is a nice segue into how you have to be approachable as an educator. Once again, we know this, but it takes a lot of work. It doesn't take a day, a week, a month. It's really a whole semester endeavor of creating years, truthfully years, of creating a positive learning environment. I'm still working, it's a forever thing, it really is. I think the moment you stop, you think you figured it out, is probably when you need to take a step back and say, really, do I understand what I'm doing? Mariana, we're talking about this, the next bullet. If you're to take away anything from this slide, it's probably the next one. You have to get to know your students. And this starts from day one. Get to know their interests, their fears as learners. And that's a big one too, because if they're afraid to speak up because they are afraid of being corrected, for instance, in front of others, then that's important to know, so you know you try to manage error correction in a different way with that particular person. And also, if you have a curriculum that allows this, like SHL is pretty flexible, so say a student is interested in the medical field, we can actually build in the student's interest into a later lesson, which is nice. I know not every one of us has that flexibility, but if you can build it in, great.
Sorry to interrupt you. For my experience, one thing that helps a lot to create a positive learning environment is learning your student's name very early in the semester. And it's very important to do good icebreakers and get to know each other kind of activities in the first weeks of the semester, regardless of the class that you're teaching, because if they know each other, they will feel more comfortable to work with each other, and then they won't be afraid of asking questions, they won't feel so embarrassed to participate. So I think that's one thing that helps a lot with positive learning environment.
In fact, I interviewed a student for my dissertation. The one thing he said was that it meant so much to him to have his TA remember his name. And you think, oh, that's something so small, but actually it's really not. It's very powerful to the student, especially if they're sitting at lecture hall where there's hundreds of other people. You form a community for those 16 weeks with that person. So anything you can do to build upon that is crucial. So that includes encouraging mistakes. They're there to learn. Don't expect them to be perfect. We're not perfect as speakers, so we shouldn't expect the same thing of our students. And Mariana already talked about this, but balancing that friendly, firm line, that's hard. Because you want them to feel comfortable with you, but you don't want them to feel so comfortable they're like, hey, what's up? Let's go get a beer or whatever. It depends on the class and the level of the student, and maybe it's the end of the semester kind of thing. But they have to respect you first. And that is something we're going to talk about a lot. It's this concept of reciprocity, where you have to be open and willing to listen to your students in order for them to reciprocate and do the same. Again, pretty obvious stuff, but we are touching upon all of this today.
Another key concept is organization. If you organize your classes well in advance, and like I was mentioning right now, I'm teaching a class that I'm not very familiar, so I'm trying to plan way ahead that I would do with other classes that I feel more comfortable. Just because if you are organized, you will feel more secure about what you're teaching, so your students also will feel like you know what you're saying. And when we did this slide, we were thinking a lot about new teaching assistants that they are taking their classes and teaching classes, and there is a moment in the semester that they get really overwhelmed. So organization is key to teach your classes and to be able to be successful in the classes that you're taking. Scaffold your lessons, like Sarah just did an example of a scaffolding. How we can teach a concept is by doing something as simple as this, helping us, students to come up with their own answers for something. That's a way to scaffold. You can do scaffolding with sentences through little, in the case of foreign language, with little children's book. You can use those to create an activity where you go from noun to sentence and then to little paragraph. Another strategy that you can use is having concepts and definitions or examples and then put them in group and they have to match up. And those kind of activities help the students to go from 0 to higher levels in any class that you teach.
Oh, do you want me to add?
Oh, yeah, I don't know if you
Yeah.
wanted to add anything.
Yeah, scaffolding, I mean, that's a really crucial step because, you know, the moment you start your class, you should always review something that you've covered from the previous class. And if you ask them if they have questions, chances are a lot of them aren't going to say anything. So still take the time to review. And you know your students better than anyone else. But that scaffolding piece, if you see them struggling, and you can do something as simple as, you know, good, not so good, really not good at all. And it can be private, like here to the chest when we were working with the little kids, that's what they had them do in case they were embarrassed to admit that they weren't really getting it. Do simple hand gestures in your classroom. It really helps build a rapport too. And that's, you know, again, ties into the next bullet. If you don't know something, you can always come back. The students appreciate that. We're not perfect.
Another issue that we discussed that is very important for classroom management is consistency. Do the same for all the students.
Yeah.
Try not to take exceptions. So if you said in your syllabus that you are not accepting late work unless they bring medical documentation, just stick to it.
Yeah.
Regardless if you like the student or you don't, or because at the end, it's easier for you to control everything if you just, and it's easier to be more strict in the beginning and then be more lenient towards the end. But if you start being very lenient at the beginning, then at the end you have no control over your class. And then everybody's putting excuses, everybody's busy, everybody's getting sick, and you're like correcting and grading things like in different weeks for different people. And one thing that I did new this year, and it goes with respond to behavioral concerns in a way that doesn't further interrupt your class, is also telling in the syllabus how we should address each other in emails. Because I felt like in the past, students were like sending me emails like, hey, yo, I have this, you know, and so this time I put a note saying, please, when you send me an email, write my name, say what is the issue that you have a concern, and say goodbye. And now we respond in the same way.
Yeah. Like she said, something so simple, but actually, I mean, just a show of hands, how many of you have gotten emails that you're like, well, this is like a text message to a professor? Pretty much. So they do need you to model what is considered appropriate professional behavior. Mind you, we're working with younger adults, obviously, but they're relying on us for that guidance. They really are.
And sometimes we think that some things are obvious, but they are not.
No.
And then I found that really helpful because every single email that I received this semester said, Dear Professor Mariani.
Yeah, share the story. But you know, we're going to have you get into groups in a little bit with each of the note cards, and I want you to be thinking about some of the things that we're sharing with you, because hopefully that feedback, that input will help you address some of the questions you raised at the start. So we're going to kind of go through this quickly for the sake of time. And you've already touched upon this. You, just from your scaffolding activity, you know that you have to be dynamic as an instructor, group students differently, try to break apart those cliques. Again, think about the purpose of forming a community. If you have the same group of students that keep sitting together, they've gotten so comfortable that they're not really getting all that wonderful feedback from others. So count them off, come up with different strategies, birthdays for instance, animals. I mean, you could come up with a whole slew of strategies. Birthdays, I had them line up according to their birthday once, you know, March 3rd, whatever it is, and then the person that was standing to their left, that's who they were partnered with. So they got practice speaking, you know, months and dates, that kind of thing. So yeah, simple things like that, and then they're using the target language. Okay, do you want me to just run through? Sure. Okay, be responsive, we referred to this already too. Students really want feedback, and they want it immediately, and we know that we can't always do that, especially if it's written feedback. Maria and I were both talking, and we try to give ourselves as instructors a week to grade something thoroughly, give them proper feedback. But you can do immediate feedback in class too. And it doesn't have to be something as like, oh, you know, muy bien, or buen trabajo in Spanish. It should be something else like, thank you for your contribution, that's a great idea, thank you for asking. Those types of things, that's all feedback. If the response is incorrect, this is actually a really important one. We were kind of debating, how do you handle when a student contributes something but the answer is incorrect? It depends on the learner. So ask, get that feedback at the very beginning of the semester. If they want that immediate correction, because some people do, then do it for that person. But some people get really put off by it, like, oh, I just made a contribution, it was wrong, I'm never going to speak again. They don't want, right? I'm sure you've all had those types of students.
Well, I think it's pretty good if you're like, say, you repeat what they said, and say, so you're saying.
Yes, yes, recast it. And always like, oh, that's a great, idea, Juliana, can anyone else add to that? That's another way of saying you're validating what she said, even if it might not be 100% right. You ask another student to make a contribution, and if no one's really understanding, this is again another ESL strategy, they need time to think in pairs sometimes and discuss ideas, and then bring it back to the whole class so that that apprehension that they might have of talking in front of others is lessened. It might still be there, but it's lessened. Okay?
Do you have a comment?
Yeah, well, what I usually do in those cases, it depends now, it depends on the kind of question that comes, but
Yeah.
some of the things that some of the strategies that I use is that if they say something that is not quite right, I can say like, okay, that's a good point. What do you mean exactly by that? And I let them elaborate, and whatever helps me to actually redirect the question, saying like, yes, exactly, that's a good point in this sense, and I continue. That gives them validation, but I'm not telling them specifically that was wrong or that was right when it wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that I usually do is something that I forgot.
Peer review exercises help a lot too.
Yeah.
Because they can get some feedback from a peer and then putting them in a way that you know which students are stronger than the others, and you pair them like that, and that will help them. So it's not always you give them feedback.
Yeah.
And then you can later review or revise.
Revise, always revise. All right, so now we're going to have our fun little collaborative activity. So hopefully you can take some of the tips and ideas that we presented to you all, and you're going to discuss, you might get your own question, that's okay. But the purpose is to talk amongst yourselves for a couple of minutes, and you can go to the puddle boards if you want, or just maybe jot down some points, or just have a discussion, right? We're differentiating right now, whatever works for you as learners. And we're going to come back and hopefully do a nice little takeaway. So go ahead and take 2 cards. You need 2 cards. Okay? All right, you need 2 cards. One more.
What? That happened?
Oh yeah, thank you for coming.
Yeah, I did.
Do you want to just join? Okay.
Still.
What did you get? Land or whatever it is.
Was it your hat? Oh, is it?